Welcome to the LTC podcast, where we bring people from across the industry together to talk about what really makes the hospitality industry shine: the people. We will offer insights, guidance, and best practices when it comes to caring for the licensed hospitality workforce. In each episode, we'll be sitting down with someone from the industry or an expert in their field. We're diving into the real stuff, the challenges, the triumphs, and everything in between, to figure out how we can make our workplace better and happier for everyone. Our mission, it's pretty simple. We want to make sure that those of us in hospitality aren't just serving others, but also taking great care of ourselves and our colleagues. Hi.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Could you give us a quick intro on who you are and what you do, please?
I can. My name's Molly Davis. I am Head of Communications for the BII, which is the British Institute of Innkeeping, for those who don't know. And my role covers all of our websites, social media, communications to members, emails, events, awards, and also representation to government alongside our CEO, Stephen Alton.
Amazing. And today we are talking about all things menopause, and you did a really lovely speech about your experience with the menopause at the People Conference Awards. But before we get into your experience, could you tell us what you knew about menopause or perimenopause before you started feeling some symptoms?
Probably nothing, I would say. No, maybe that's not fair. I obviously was aware of the menopause and aware of what potentially could happen, but it was really the basics about it's going to happen in your 50s probably, or maybe even later than that. And having had no real kind of experience with family or friends, it wasn't something I ever really thought about. I'm very lucky to have 2 children, and again, very lucky to have not really struggled to have those. So kind of from a body perspective, being a woman, I hadn't really given it much thought, and certainly didn't know what I know now about the symptoms, the effect it can have on you, and definitely not the age that it can happen to you, which is, in terms of perimenopause, could happen any time from kind of like your late 30s up to your 50s, depending on who you are, how your genetics are, what your experience in life is. So yeah, I was very kind of unaware of everything, as I think a lot of people are and were.
It comes down to, looking back, we were not having these conversations. Women have been suffering in silence for years and years, and without those conversations, how are you meant to know?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Completely taboo.
And I feel like it's the same thing for women's health generally. I think there's so many things that I've now researched and found out about around the menopause, but around women's health generally. So many studies around menopause, but around pain, around cancer, around all sorts of other illnesses, diseases, symptoms, things that people go through. All of those studies were done on men. So they haven't got any bearing or limited bearing on women and how they experience pain. We've got a much higher threshold for pain, generally speaking, which I know lots of men won't agree with necessarily, but seeing some of the videos about the period simulators that I've seen in recent times has kind of reinforced that we experience pain in a different way, and we have different tolerance levels for it. So when you're asking someone how much pain they're in, and assessing that for severity of symptoms across the board, no matter whether you're dealing with menopause, periods, pain in general, other diseases, you're not getting a fair reflection if you're having your results skewed by men's answers. So yeah, I mean, it really has opened up a massive can of worms for me.
Well, and I think when you look at menopause and women's health issues, it's clear there's a huge global, national, systemic issue, which, is out of our control. There's not much we can do about that other than having these conversations and giving new generations coming through the opportunity to, one, be aware, and also, get as prepared as they can for the things that lie ahead. But we won't kind of dive too deep into all of those systemic issues, but could you give us an idea on kind of what you have experienced with perimenopause and menopause?
Yeah. So again, looking back, I now realise that probably in my kind of mid to late 30s was experiencing possibly the start of my perimenopause. I 8 or so years ago, so I would have been 37, I had jury service. And for anybody who's done jury service, you'll know it's generally 2 weeks. And if you're lucky to get a case that's sort of that long. And towards the end of the first week, very luckily, my period started. Not luckily that my period started, obviously, but lucky it was the end of the week. And I was managing to kind of manage it, but it was really heavy. And then over the weekend, literally on the Friday night, I just was flooding. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't, I felt really tired because it takes it out of you and you're losing a lot of blood. But also, more importantly, I just was panicking because I was thinking there is absolutely no way I can sit as a juror when you don't have the ability to just get up and go to the toilet when you want to, and do this. Luckily, the majority of it sort of happened over the weekend, and it had calmed down enough that I could manage it from Monday onwards. But I remember thinking then, like, God, if you've got a job that means that you are in that situation all the time, if you work on a checkout, if you work behind a bar, if you are the only one on because it's supposedly quiet and you get a rush on, you can't leave your post. You can't, if you're a teacher, you've got to teach a class. You can't just run out of the classroom. There are so many workplaces that don't have that flexibility as a norm, and I just thought, wow, that's crazy. But also didn't actually think it was anything to do with menopause at that point. I thought it was just that I'd had a really heavy period and it was unfortunate. And I did go to my doctors at the time because I was worried about them, because it was something that had been sort of happening a little bit more, but that was definitely kind of the worst. And to her credit, my GP then did a blood test but said, I can't really see any issues with your hormones or anything there. So maybe she had it in the back of her mind that it could be that. But because the blood test came back and because I was in my late 30s, there was no intervention. There was no anything that could be done. And I wasn't on the pill or anything like that. So that was suggested, but I hadn't always got on with it. And I didn't really want to go back onto contraception when I was at a time in my life where that wasn't necessary, putting more drugs in my body. So yeah, I kind of struggled on. It wasn't too bad. But really the time that it hit was in the pandemic, when we were in lockdown. Again, had really, really struggled with heavy periods, but then wouldn't have a period for 3 months, which was delightful, obviously, but not when you trade it off against kind of 2 weeks of really very heavy, getting up in the middle of the night 2 or 3 times, being absolutely paranoid at work. So that was when I sort of thought, maybe something's happening, maybe something's not right, but also maybe this is stress that everybody says, if you're trying to have a baby and your periods aren't regular, it's probably the stress of trying to have a baby. So just relax. But obviously pandemic was not a time where it was easy to relax, and I was very busy. So again, kind of didn't really think anything of it until... and also couldn't have access to seeing a GP at that time, really, unless you were, COVID or really, really poorly. So it wasn't until kind of the year after that I went to the doctors, because I was like, something's really not right. And very fortunately, because my GP is very good and sort of listens and does the right thing. She did do blood tests, and she said, you are struggling a little bit. Your hormones, I can see some peaks and some dips. But one of the things about hormonal blood tests, as I've since found out, is that they're not really an effective way of measuring your hormones, because they have to be done at specific times of your cycle. And if you don't have a cycle that's reliable, then, and the state of the doctor's appointments now, you can't possibly go, well, actually it'll be a week on Monday, because that's not how it goes. So you could be completely in the wrong point of your cycle. Your symptoms could be very sort of low at that point, and so they won't see anything in that kind of snapshot of your blood at the time. So there's a big movement now around it being really important to check other things than hormones. A bit of maybe a life hack is that the one symptom that GPs universally will listen to as a potential menopause or perimenopause indicator is hot flushes. It's the traditional one that we always kind of associate with kind of, you know, seaside cartoon characters of older ladies fanning themselves, and but it is the one that universally they will go, well, okay, maybe we could look into it a bit more. But as I said, I was really lucky to have a GP who took me seriously and suggested that maybe a low dose of HRT might be something to try. And at that point, I was very willing to try it. So that's how we got to that sort of stage.
It's so interesting because you say, you know, you had a GP who listened to you and did the right thing, but you know, were at the mercy of having that person that, you know, will listen and will explore. If something isn't, you know, black and white on paper, you need people to kind of really consider, you know, what it could be, and not just looking at what, you know, is on the paper. And I guess, you know, then we as women have, you know, a responsibility to be advocates for ourselves, because if nobody else is going to be.
But that's really tough to have to push and to say, no, I'm really sure about this, because you're not sure about it. You're not a medical professional.
Yeah.
You're at a time where if you're experiencing symptoms, you're probably anxious. You're probably not very confident at sort of, you know, advocating for yourself. And even within my surgery, there are GPs who I've had friends say they won't even look at it because I'm not in my late 40s, because I'm, you know, only just 40 or something like that. So you've got this kind of postcode lottery, depending on where you live and depending on what services there are available to you. But even within your own doctor's surgery, there is a difference of opinion or attitude from GPs. And I think the most frustrating thing is I follow Dr. Louise Newson, who is absolutely brilliant, real advocate for women in menopause. She's a GP, and she talks about her own story and how frustrated she was when she felt and that she knew she had symptoms, but obviously couldn't prescribe for herself, but was really having a lot of trouble seeing somebody to help her. So she kind of fights on that. And she said that it's 13 to 14% of women who are of an age that might benefit from HRT are actually getting it. So kind of, you know, just over 1 in 10 who have access to it out of people who might need it. And there's so many studies, and I could ramble on forever, but the fact about HRT in terms of the body identical HRT is that it protects you from so much more going into kind of your older age. I don't want to say older age, actually, middle age. Let's go with that.
That's much better.
In terms of heart disease for women, in terms of osteoporosis, there's a huge study about the effects on dementia and Alzheimer's, as in positive effects, because once your body is depleted of estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, all of those hormones that kind of make us who we are, the activity in the brain has been studied and found that it just goes. I mean, the energy in your brain just disappears, and it never comes back if you haven't got those hormones replaced in your body. So there's so many positives, and obviously there's negatives in terms of the study that was done a few years ago that has now been proved not to have been a good study. It was the study of the wrong people at the wrong time in their menopause, and with the wrong risk factors, causing breast cancer potentially, an increased risk. There's very, very little increased risk. And if people actually have got access to the right information, then for me, definitely, and I know for a lot of people, the benefits far outweigh the risks. But it's still not a magic cure-all either.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that I was listening to a podcast about that study, and I think it's such a shame because there's so many women who have been so scared of HRT unnecessarily, and have missed out on the opportunity of, you know, having an improved quality of life in their middle age. And I think it's great that we're coming away from that, and perception is changing around HRT when it can improve quality of life for so many people.
Yeah, and I do think that's good, but we talk quite a lot at work about the echo chamber effect and what you think everybody else knows. So once you've kind of come to something and you've gone, oh my God, I never knew anything about menopause, this is why I feel like this is why this is happening to me, you just assume that you're the last one to know and that everybody else knows. And when I did the speech at the People Conference, I was very nervous about it because, you know, it's 300 people who didn't realise they were there to hear me talk about periods and women's health. But it was amazing how many people came up to me afterwards and said, I didn't realise this, I didn't realise that, and I think I might be perimenopausal. But even more so, the men that came up to me afterwards and said, I had no idea. This completely explains why my mum went batshit crazy for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. My wife is feeling this, this and this. I'm going to go home now and say we need to go to the doctors and get you on HRT. I was like, mabes, don't do that.
Approach it a bit gently.
Yeah, just a bit subtler. But and so you think, gosh, actually, I've come to it, and there is a lot more around it with Davina McCall and the amazing work she's done around it. But it is still very much something that people are not comfortable talking about, and something that people are not aware of, all of the ins and outs of it. And I include doctors in that. There's no training for GPs on menopause, which is absolutely nuts when you think about the fact that 51% of the population will be perimenopausal or menopausal, full stop. Like, there's no kind of like, well, you know, maybe they will be, maybe they won't be. Some people will not experience symptoms in the same way as others, but 51% of the population will go through this, and will be going through it for potentially 30 years of their life, 40 years of their life. If you live till, you know, start when I started and I lived till 80, then like 40 plus years of your life, half your life in that kind of state. And if they haven't got any training, and they haven't got any understanding of how it can help and what, you know, they need to do, then it's just crazy.
It is crazy. And then if it affects 51% of the population, you know, suffer through that, then it affects everybody.
Well, of course it does, and my husband and my children will tell you that.
Yeah.
In no uncertain terms. It does affect everybody, absolutely everybody, and you know, talking about it in a workplace context, there are so many different times where I think, God, if I was behind the bar, or if I was in the kitchen and I was, you know, sweating over a stove, and, you know, all of that, or if I was in Chef Whites and my period suddenly arrived, like, how would you cope with all of those things? And there's a great lady called Helen Tomlinson, who is the menopause champion. She's been appointed by the government. It's a voluntary role. She works in sort of HR for a deco, but she's fantastic, and she talks about all of the things that can affect you in a workplace in terms of menopause. And she talks about it in kind of terms of autonomous and non-autonomous roles. So I'm in an autonomous role to a certain extent. I can decide if I want to work from home. I can leave my desk at any time if I need the loo. Like, nobody's questioning me. I don't have to wear specific clothes. I can always have a pair of jeans on with a tampon in my pocket, which is literally how I live my life. So that's so much easier. It doesn't mean that I'm not, you know, don't suffer, and people who are in autonomous roles don't suffer. But if you're in a non-autonomous role where you just have to turn up every day at a certain time in a certain place, on your feet all day long, dealing with customers, if you've become anxious or, you know, something like that, it just must be awful. And I think we really need to do something from a workplace perspective to try and step up the support that people get, that they need, that they're not always getting from their GPs and sort of medical care.
So when you say you did this talk at the People Conference and you were nervous about it, why did you then do it?
A couple of reasons. One, we had a speaking slot that sort of cancelled at the last minute. Well, not at the last minute. It was kind of it was the week before, but that's fairly last minute. And combined with the fact that I am sort of really deep and in my perimenopause and suffering with symptoms, so I complain about it loudly and often to everybody at work. And I'd been to the Punch Pubs & Co. Menavist event probably about 3-4 weeks beforehand, and it was really inspirational because lots of people spoke. That's where I met Helen Tomlinson, and lots of people spoke about their own experiences of what it meant to them and how little they knew about it until they kind of started on that journey. Oh, it sounds awful saying journey, but, like, you know, it is a journey. So all of those kind of came together, and I was like, right, if I'm sort of saying that we don't talk about it enough, and there's a stigma attached to it, and nobody knows as much as I think they do, and I don't know as much as I think I know, then maybe I should do some research, and maybe I should start talking about it so that everybody else can feel that they can talk about it. So it wasn't particularly a comfortable thing to do, but I think it's good to do things that are uncomfortable sometimes. And I'm really glad I did it, because the conversations that I've had then and since have been really, really productive. And I'm working on trying to pull together some meaningful information to help our members, as well as kind of wider industry people. So yeah, it's been a very positive thing, which is always good.
What would you say to somebody like a friend, a colleague, a family member who, you know, is female and who will be going through the perimenopause or menopause? Is there anything that you have found really beneficial in your journey?
Research, like do your research. And I would really encourage everybody, but particularly women who are going through it, and people who are in a management position in roles that really could be affected by this, but generally, to find out exactly what it could be that it impacts on people's daily lives. So Davina McCall is an obvious one, and probably the most famous person. So her books and her 2 documentaries were just really life-changing for me. I had literally booked my appointment with the doctor the day before I watched the first documentary. And what it did for me is I felt much more confident in going into the room and saying, look, I'm experiencing X, Y, Z. I really think that even though it's early, I really think that this is to do with my hormones. And actually, you remember when I came to you a couple of years ago, because I had those really heavy periods, and I really think that, you know, this is something that needs looking at. Now, I do have a great GP, but if I didn't, that might have tipped the needle on somebody who wasn't as convinced. And, you know, sadly, you've probably got to be quite forceful about it. But that's really difficult if you're in a position where you're scared about going on to HRT because you know, have got like an increased risk of breast cancer in your family history. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions where you can't take HRT safely or you shouldn't. But the vast majority of women, it's a hugely beneficial thing to do and a hugely safe thing to do. So educate yourself, definitely. I think we need to start educating our younger women as well, because it's all very well having all this information out there, but if they aren't really engaging with it because they're in their 20s or hadn't even considered having kids yet, so that is kind of so far out of their mind, having some availability of information and broadening it out from menopause to sort of whole menstrual health, because there are lots of women who are suffering with polycystic ovaries and endometriosis and all sorts of things that affect their kind of daily lives. And, you know, I love the period simulator that we mentioned earlier, but I would really also love for men to just have like some sort of device that means that all of a sudden their pants are full of blood. Because you don't know unless you go through it. And even when you are, you know, a woman who's been going through it for years, it takes you by surprise sometimes. And you're like, oh God, you know. So something like that would be great, but I'm not sure it would happen. But definitely more conversations about it generally would be really, really helpful, so that people don't feel that there's a stigma attached to talking about it. Look, I'm quite open and quite happy to talk about things, whereas not all people would be. And I definitely have got happier about talking about things the older I've got and the more comfortable I've got in my own skin. So I do think it's tricky with younger women, but the more information we can give to them, the better, so that they are prepared to go, do you know what? That's really weird. Like some of the weirdest symptoms I had, which I did cover some of them in the talk, tinnitus was one of them. Never had tinnitus before. And then again, around about the same time, early 40s, it just suddenly came on from nowhere, and it was just this ever-present, distracting, high-pitched whine in your ears. It's worse when you go to sleep at night because everything's quiet, so at least during the day kind of you're distracted by other noises. Went to the doctors. Oh, there's nothing you can do about it. Don't listen to music in headphones on high volume. I was like, I haven't listened to music in headphones for a long time. I'm in my 40s. That's something younger people do. So research the symptoms. There are around about 70 symptoms now that can be attributed to menopause, and not ones that you would think would be.
I mean, I recently had somebody in my life tell me that they are constantly itchy all over her body, day and night. She can't sleep. She's been given 3 different antihistamines. They're not really helping.
No.
Like, and I just couldn't believe, like, I had no idea like that. I was like, that's insane. Like, surely there's something else if the antihistamines aren't working. And she was like, there's, like, she's going back to her GP saying this isn't working. Like, she can't sleep. She's constantly itchy. And she thinks it's because she's perimenopausal.
And clearly I'm not a GP, but it's a very common symptom. And it's trying to kind of logically connect them in your brain as to why that might be. And, hormones control so many things in every area of our body that you don't think of. You just think of it as being around periods, which is a big part of it. But itchy ears as well. Even if you're not itching all over, itchy ears, because when you lose estrogen, you lose elasticity in your skin, you lose moisture. And so it's really itchy in your ears, where it's normally a kind of quite a mildly damp environment. It's logical when you think about it. Frozen shoulder is another really common symptom for women in perimenopause, where they can't figure out why. They've done nothing to it. They've not changed their exercise regime, but it's where all the tendons and the joints are moving and shrinking and changing because they haven't got the same level of hormones in them.
And when I was listening to this podcast about the menopause, they were saying this about frozen shoulder, and they were talking about frozen shoulder, but then I can't remember who the lady was talking about the effects of having a frozen shoulder and a woman not being able to get dressed, put on a bra because she can't get her arm around. And you just think, okay, you say frozen shoulder, oh, that's a bit rubbish, but what does it mean to have a frozen shoulder? Like, you can't do anything. You can't get yourself dressed in the morning. How are you expected to go to work?
No, exactly. And there are so many things that you could be suffering all at once, or you just get past one and then another one creeps in. And definitely I've had a lot of different symptoms. And again, looking back, I didn't realise that that's what they were. Vertigo is another one, which I don't really know how that's connected to your hormones, but I guess it is. But like had a massive episode of vertigo where I could not move my head. Otherwise, the room span, and I felt sick and dizzy, and it was really debilitating. And again, I just thought it was stress at the time because it was before a big event. For anybody who has had vertigo, menopause or not related, the Epley manoeuvre is something to look up. It's a really simple thing you can do at home in 5 minutes, and it completely cured my vertigo. And I've told several people about it after the talk. They were like, "Oh, what was that thing?" And again, completely cured the people they passed that on to. It's basically you lie on the back of your bed with your head kind of off the bed, and you turn your head in a very specific number and way of movements, and it makes you very uncomfortable because when you do turn your head, it makes you feel sick, so you try and stop it. But if you do these kind of movements, it kind of realigns your inner ear balance and stops you from feeling sick.
Is this when you're experiencing vertigo? Or
Yes. It's not something, I mean, you feel free to do it. I don't think it would hurt you. You just look a bit silly lying off your bed going, but there are so many symptoms. So I would encourage people to go and look them up and do your research. Davina McCall is a great place to start. Dr. Louise Newson on lots of social media channels is another place to start. And there was some good information from an employer perspective on the government's Help to Grow website if you search for menopause. So there's some good toolkit support on there in terms of how to help employees. But it's not enough, I don't think.
Yeah, well, while you say that, I came across some stats which I really couldn't believe, that 1 in 10 women who have worked while going through the menopause have left a job to the severity of their symptoms, and 2/3, so 67% of women aged between 40 and 60 reported that they have struggled to go into work due to their menopause symptoms. And this doesn't even cover women who can't take a promotion, who have to cut down their hours because they can't get in all the time. I mean, what can businesses do about this?
I think it's really important to talk about, we've talked about kind of really physical symptoms and the impact that has. So putting your bra on if you've got frozen shoulder. I've actually got an injury on my arm at the moment, which is not frozen shoulder, but I'm blaming it on menopause anyway. And I really struggle to put my bra on because it's a pulled muscle. Periods, hot sweats, all of those sorts of things physically, employers could help with in terms of better uniforms if you have to wear a uniform, understanding of women going through menopause might need more frequent toilet breaks, having regular meetings with other women who are suffering. Now, that's easier said than done in smaller companies and individual pubs. There might just be one person there who's suffering, and they might not want to talk to you about it. So what you can't do is assume that just you've got a woman of a certain age that they're definitely menopausal, and if they snap at you that's what it is. It might be you've just been a bit of an arse. So I think it all goes back to conversations and being open and kind and understanding, and that should be universal, nothing to do with menopause. It should be for everybody in every situation. But I think another massive part of menopause and perimenopause is the emotional side of it. And obviously your hormones regulate a huge amount of that. So forget what other things you might have going on in your life at that time. Teenagers, parents that you have to help look after. We're an aging population, and so we're possibly looking after 2 generations when we get to our early 40s and going forwards. You're in a job potentially that's the best job you've ever had in terms of your seniority, in terms of your responsibilities. Your kids are grown up enough that you are probably full time, so that brings another element of kind of stress. But adding on to all of that, the fact that your hormones are declining and decreasing, and it makes it very easy for anxiety, self-doubt, really kind of not nice emotions to creep in. And I think that is probably a bigger part of that 1 in 10 women quitting, and those women not taking promotions, not believing in themselves, losing confidence for no good reason other than their hormones are not at the right levels. There's a really interesting debate going on about testosterone at the moment because it's a male hormone, right? But it's not. We all have it. And testosterone that we have gets changed to estrogen in our bodies. So the more testosterone you have, the more estrogen you have, and it's kind of an all-round thing, but it's not licensed for women to take as a supplementary HRT. You have to go private to get it. You have to, have a lot of things going on to try and access that. And yet, if men went into hospital for an operation that would be removing their hormones, so if they had testicular cancer or had something that meant they have to have an operation to remove what makes their hormones, there is no way they would leave that hospital without that hormone replacement. It just wouldn't happen. But the same is not true for women. There's lots of stories of women who've had complete hysterectomies and then been told to kind of see how you go, love. And there is such an imbalance in terms of the healthcare that we have available. But I think the anxiety, the depression, the self-doubt that comes along with all the perimenopause symptoms is probably the biggest thing that employers need to be aware of and can help with in terms of kindness and understanding again, and joining other people together to talk about it from a business perspective as well. Like if you're a pub or a bar or a hospitality venue, you're likely to be quieter in the mornings. You're likely to be have some quiet spots that you could do with filling. Women coming to talk about menopause together is just a brilliant. There's so many examples of pubs having menopause cafes and support groups that actually from a business perspective, you'd be helping your community, you'd be helping your staff, and you'd be making some money. So I think talking about it is the key, but recognising the huge variety of symptoms that people can and do have.
What advice would you give to men who have partners, colleagues, friends going through the menopause or perimenopause? How can they be part of this change and improved way of thinking for helping women?
I mean, it's really difficult because I do feel for men who are partners of women going through perimenopause, because at no point in your life did you ever want to mention to your wife that she was a bit grumpy. So was her period due? If you felt like you were brave enough to do that, then good on you. But it's basically like the kind of mountainous version of that. And I think it's really difficult depending on what your relationship is like. And again, it all comes back down to kindness and understanding and having open conversations. And so I think the responsibility on women is to really open up and have those conversations with your partners, with your employers if you feel comfortable. But I think the more research you do on it, the more you will feel comfortable about doing that. So you can say, look, you know, this is something that I'm going through. I'm pretty sure it's related to menopause, perimenopause, and I need some help in this area. Again, with partners, saying, I'm going through this, I feel rubbish, I feel like something's not right, I need your support. That's really important. But also from a male perspective, understanding that times are very different. So if you've seen your mum go through menopause and you've understood what that is, or you've seen somebody else go through it, it's not the sentence that it used to be, which was like, you'd have a really hard time and then eventually you'd be okay. Yeah. Or you'd have an easy-ish time and you'd be okay, or, you know, whatever. But so many women have kind of not given up, that's not the right way of looking at it, but have given up areas of their life, work, relationships, all of that, because there was no other option. You just had to get on with it. And that's not the case anymore. You know, we kind of 100 years ago, we had life expectancy of kind of mid-50s and now it's early 80s. So you've got so much more life to give past 40. And I really think that having healthy conversations about it with men, with your employers, with other people, and sharing your own experiences with your daughters, with your family. My family get sick of me talking about it, obviously, but I'm really pleased that they know about it, and they don't just think that if I'm being a bit batshit crazy that it's completely unrelated. I mean, it might be, to be fair. You don't know, but that's just the thing. It's so unpredictable that just having conversations about it and making it more normalised is really important. But also, if you're a man, don't go in with the, you're definitely going through the menopause, love, and maybe we need to get you some drugs. Kind, inquisitive conversations would definitely be something to do after you've done your research.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing, you know, we say, like, you know, women, do your research, men, do your research.
Absolutely,
like, if you've got women in your life, just take it upon yourself, listen to a podcast, read some books.
Yeah.
Just, like, know as much as you can about it, because the more you know, the more you can help and offer some help.
Definitely.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. That's been really super insightful. I
welcome.
really appreciate your open and honest approach to this. I think, you know, you are helping people, and you know, from me personally, like, thank you for having this conversation, because I've learned a lot. So I can only imagine that anyone listening will have also learned quite a lot.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. It's nice to be able to talk about it, she says. No, it is. It's good. It's good to talk about it. It is.
And I guess the more we talk about it, the more normalised it is, like you say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kaylee.